Okay, I'm sorry in advance because my throat isn't so great, so I don't know how my voice is going to hold up. So for now, I've sort of got to a point with the first track of the album, Torii. I've got to a point where I'm pretty happy with where it's at. It's definitely not polished yet, and particularly when it comes to the drums, I definitely don't have like the final drums. Actually, I haven't changed the beat since the last video. Everything else has changed quite a bit, or rather, everything else has changed a lot. I've reached a point where I'm pretty happy with where it's at, and I've been working on it for quite a long time now, and I think it would just be good for me to take a break from it. Torii has been, I don't want to say a roller coaster because that implies it's been like really up and down and like really stressful, and it hasn't. It's been like a tame roller coaster, like especially because it's the first track of the album that I've been working on properly. It kind of, the way I work on it kind of sets a precedent for all the other tracks. So in a way there was a lot of pressure and a bit of a learning curve as well to sort of learn what the best way to do this is and like exactly how I'm going to change these tracks and what they're going to look like at the end. And so there were moments where I was working on it and I was like, I don't know what direction I'm taking this in, like I don't know what's going on. And other times where I felt super confident about it, really sort of hyped up about it. So yeah, it was a tame roller coaster because it was never like awful. I always felt calm about it. At least it was, let's experiment with this and see where it goes and just sort of go along for the ride. But now I've reached a point where I am confident in all of the pieces of this track. Like I like all of the sounds I've put together and how they fit together, and that's going to be the main focus of the video today, is like looking at the bits that I added that felt like a win to me, or felt like, yes, this is the right direction, this is a good way to go. I'll also cover like a few ideas I had that obviously didn't make it, but the way I'm splitting this video up is looking at the bits that carried this song forward. It's definitely not smooth yet. It's still pretty rough, but it's kind of like I've gathered all the materials for a collage and I've been sorting through them, and I finally have all the pieces that I want and I roughly know how they're going to go together. It's just a case of neatly putting them together, but I'm going to save that for a later date. Right now I want to carry on, I want to move on to another track and carry on with this kind of composition stage, I guess. Like I don't want to get too wrapped up in mixing and like polishing for now. I think once I go through all the tracks and get the composition up to a certain level, I will go back and polish them all in order as well. And just in general. And I'm back. Where was I? But to conclude, now that I feel like Torii is in a secure position, I feel like I can move on to another track now. So that's what I will be covering in the next episode, and I've already started relearning it on the piano so that I can mess about with it. So in the last episode, we covered what the album is about roughly, also what the track sounded like before when it was in its draft state, as well as the composition, specifically the changes to the composition on the piano and just the music theory behind that as well. The drums, I can safely say, actually haven't changed yet. As I added more and more elements, I got more and more used to them, and I still need to change them up, but I think I'll do that during the polishing stage. So when I first started messing about with the composition of the song, and adding that key change. I wasn't totally sure about it at first. Like, I wasn't sure if it was smooth enough. And to be totally honest, it's the first time in my music that I've attempted to change the key. I thought like key changes were limited to like, I don't know, prog rock or like experimental genres like that. And then when I started looking more into music theory, I realized it was far more common than I ever thought. So yeah, I was like, I really want to put a key change in there somewhere. Like I really want to try that out. And yeah, I did it, but like I said, I wasn't sure if it sounded good. So I thought I'd ask my friend Thomas, who makes music, like really cool experimental music. You should check it out. I sent it over to him to basically say, hey, there's a key change, like, does it sound okay? I'm not sure if it sounds okay. And also at the time, I had meant for the key change to sound Phrygian, but like I mentioned in my last video, it didn't sound like that. It sounded like something else. So I wanted to check with him and see what he thought it was. Anyway, the result of all of this is that he was like, do you mind if I try adding some things to it to try and like make the change obvious? I can't remember if like we were trying to make the change more obvious or more smooth, but he was like, do you mind if I add some stuff to it? And I was like, yeah, sure, go ahead. And yeah, I loved it. It was like the first sound that had been added where I was like, oh yes, this is going in a direction and I like it, especially the guitars. And also it really did help enhance that key change in a really good way, and it made me way more confident about it. I was like, yes, I do like this key change, I am going to stick with this. So it's safe to say Thomas's parts were probably like the first crossroads, and you know, we went down a direction. I was like, yes, this is the right direction. So next, the vocals. I quite often do instrumental music, but I do like to put my vocals in there as like an instrument. What I've done in the past is just like recorded like some vocals, like basically like a few words or like just a simple melody or just like a not like that. Yeah, so quite often I record vocals and chop them up and use them as an instrument. But I do like to have a bit of I do like to have some vocals even in instrumental tracks. In a weird way, it's quite nice to, even though I tend to make all of the parts of my music, for some reason having my vocals in there feels more personal, or like there's a piece of me in there somewhere. So I quite often put vocals in, even if they're just as a subtle instrument. I think also it's quite nice because the thing we most pick up is the human voice, because we're human and that's what we want to hear. So even when vocals are in a track subtly, like they quite often are in quite a few down-tempo tracks, vocals add like, I don't know, like an extra interest because you're focused on it. Or maybe like it adds some, maybe it's that it adds some emotion to it. So even though like all the other instruments obviously are emotive, but having a voice that we can zone in on also helps with the empathy that we feel with a song. That's a weird sentence. Hopefully you know what I mean. But long story short, I do tend to put vocals in tracks whenever I can. The only time I leave them out is if they really don't suit that song, or like, you know, I've tried it and that song just doesn't need vocals, and it, like putting vocals in it is just not suitable. So with that being said, I have added vocals to Torii, and vocals can be really difficult sometimes. Like sometimes it takes a long time to get them right, but these were pretty easy. I came up with a melody and a harmony on the piano, and interestingly it fits a part that I'll talk about later as well. Like it follows the same pattern, and I can't remember which came first. Yeah, so I came up with the melody and harmony on the piano, and something I like to do recently is if I have an idea for a vocal and I want to get it down really quickly before it escapes my head, quite often I'll record it with this microphone, because it's a USB mic. So it's really simple. I'm just like, yep, click in, turn it on, quickly record, and that's that. And then, you know, once I've done that as like a vocal draft, when I want to do it properly later, I'll use this one. So that's what I did with those vocals. Like I had the idea, I quickly like mapped it out on the piano so that I knew what harmonies I was doing, and then I recorded it using this microphone with the aim to re-record it later. But to be honest, I think they're fine how they are. I've been listening to them like all this time while I've been working on this track, and they sound fine. So I don't even know if I'm going to re-record them. I probably will, more as a formality than anything else. But if I can't like get them to sound the same or better, I'm just gonna keep that version. Like, what's the harm? I mean, especially as like they're so in the background anyway. You know, they're not at the forefront, they're just this background noise. And I think especially because I've added a noise gate to them, so they sort of come in and out and weave in between other instruments anyway, so they really aren't that noticeable. So I don't know if I will re-record them or whether I'm just gonna keep them how they are. Okay, let's talk about synths. So in the last episode, I think I had reached a stage where I had composed the song on the piano, and so I had all of the MIDI information, and it was just a case of splitting up the MIDI information and running it through different synths to get the sound I wanted. One of the parts I wrote, which is like that E Lydian harmony that's going over the top pretty quickly. I tried that part on the Moog, and actually it's the same sound that I used in Below Waves, which I released recently. And I think I was just trying it out and I was like, yes, I love it. And like, I think it fits really well, because in general, like that E Lydian progression is quite, it adds a lot more energy and it feels quite uplifting, ethereal as well, maybe. Not now, Siri.
Okay.
Thank you. But yeah, that part has quite almost a role of lifting the song up. It feels quite like ethereal, like a bit magical, I guess. And actually, like one of my worries about it was that it felt a bit too ethereal, and I was like, is that what I'm trying to go for? You know, I really like it, but is it fitting into the picture in my head? And the end of that story is that once I had added more parts, yes, it was fine, and I'm definitely keeping it. Something I definitely wanted to use was the OP1, because that was the only instrument I had while I was in Japan. So naturally, sort of the sound of the OP1, like I really associate it with that trip now. And yeah, it just makes sense that the OP1 is going to be used quite heavily in most of the tracks. So when I had all of the MIDI information, I split it into like the main melody and the harmonies, and bass was done separately. So yeah, I had the main melody and the harmonies, and I wanted to assign them both to the OP1. So for the melody, I just used the same synth that I used originally for the melody, because, you know, the melody is in the original draft and I like that sound, and it just made sense to me to use that one for the main melody, because that's how the whole song was built in the first place. Having the MIDI information there just meant that like I could run the MIDI through the OP1, you know, and not have to play it myself, and just mess around with the effects and you know, the attack and the release and everything like that, so that I could change the dynamics throughout the track. And yeah, this is the first time I've done it like this, and it's great. Like, I will definitely do this always in the future. Yeah, so I recorded the main melody, and then the harmonies are a bit more complicated. I basically started by, I found like this like thin saw wave type thing. So I ran it through and like messed about with the envelopes, but it sounded a bit thin. And for the harmonies, like, as they're very much supporting the melody, I wanted them to have a bit more body. So I was like, oh, okay, I'll see if I can layer up another synth. And I really like the combination of the two, but they are both they're not substantial by themselves or even together. They kind of work as atmosphere or like extra effects, especially with all of the changing of the envelopes. It's kind of like they're weaving in and out of the music, which I really like. But again, I really wanted the harmonies to have a bit more body. So what I ended up doing was keeping the electric piano that I had originally used as a stand-in, because I noticed every time I muted it to be like, yeah, you know, I'm done with it now, I can get rid of it. Every time I muted it, I didn't like the song as much anymore. So yeah, I ended up keeping it. So those harmonies are like made up of 3 different sounds, which kind of, you know, one is acting as the body, and then the other 2 are kind of weaving in and out and adding finesse to the main body. So things were going well. I was definitely heading in a direction. I just wasn't sure if it was the right direction yet. Something I've quite often done in the past is like I'll be heading in a certain direction with a song for quite a while, and then I'll reach a certain point where I'm like, this doesn't fit the picture in my head, this is not right, I'm gonna tear it all apart and start again. And I was starting to get a bit worried that was happening. I was like, oh my god, like I'm gonna have to tear this thing apart if it doesn't sort of solidify soon. So I was a bit worried for a bit. I think I was just having a play around on the Moog, like I wasn't actually working on this track at all, or any track. I was just like changing around envelopes mostly, just to see what I could get out of it. And the result was that I just came up with the sound that I really liked. And, you know, I basically switched to the right key and tried out some progressions. I was like, yes, I like this a lot. And I recorded it just like super quickly, like just straight to audio. And yeah, it just glued it together in a way that it hadn't been glued before. Yes, okay, this is what it was missing, specifically the sound. From there, I felt much more confident about where it was going. Like that's the moment where I wasn't so worried about like the ethereal synth or the layering of the OP1 / electric piano harmonies. And even the drums like suddenly sounded better to me with this sound just sort of gluing everything together. And from there, I could see the end was in sight. Whereas before I was like, how much longer is it going to take until I can at least see the finishing line for this track? But yeah, this did it. So this was another crossroads that I got to, moved into a direction, and it was like, yes, the picture is getting clearer. This song is starting to like fit like the image or the profile in my head. So for each track that I do, I keep a to-do list for it. So if I come up with ideas for something I should try, I always try to write it down because I'll forget. I'll end up in this loop where I'm just sitting at my laptop listening to the track and just listening and not really like doing anything to it. So it's good to have ideas actually written down. So I'm like, yes, okay, I need to do this and this today and try this out and this out. Otherwise, I'll just be sitting there thinking. So the track was getting closer to what it needed to be, but it still wasn't quite there. And I had a bunch of stuff written on my list. Let me see if I can find some examples of what I wrote down. So I put down, try a faster tempo for the drums. Like make it feel more like 140 BPM rather than 70, which is what it is. Come up with a new rhythm. Come up with fills. Use field recordings to make a rhythm. Use a gatekeeper. All of these ideas relate to the energy of the track. So I was trying to give it more energy and make it feel a bit faster. Maybe not at all times in the track, but at least in like some parts of the track, I wanted to add more energy, more rhythm. All of those things were fine ideas, but what fixed it for me was an idea I actually wrote down, which was change the bass. So originally the bass was just a bass from Contact that I used for the draft. It hadn't changed since the draft. Partly it hadn't changed because I actually quite like the sound of it. It's basically sampled from a bass guitar, and I was like, either I could change it to like a synth, or I could change it to my bass guitar and be able to play a bit more fluidly and add some stuff. And that's what I tried, and basically I ended up making it, beforehand it's just this sustained bass. It's literally like long notes, which sounded good at the time, but I didn't like doing that on my bass. It just felt a bit simple, like it didn't feel as fun. So I just tried out different rhythms and ended up with this. As soon as I recorded that and I realized I was happy with it, suddenly all of the problems I had written down about the rhythm, they didn't really matter anymore, because as far as I was concerned, I've got the rhythm I want from the bass guitar, not from drums. With bass playing, I often lean more on it being a melodic instrument when, it's a rhythmic instrument as well. My background is in melodic instruments. It's only recently where I've been trying to concentrate more on rhythm. And yeah, concentrating on rhythm really paid off for this track. And yeah, that's another piece of the track that got it closer to the finishing line. The big question mark of what I'm doing with the bass has been answered now. In the past, when I've written songs, quite often, as soon as you're happy with the bass, suddenly everything goes a lot smoother. the bass is the basis of everything, and as soon as you've got that foundation, suddenly everything fits together much more and it's all flowing much more. So like I mentioned at the beginning, I'm putting Torii to rest for now because I've been working on it for quite a long time. It was the first track that I was using this new method for. So it was the guinea pig in a lot of ways. So yeah, I've been like concentrating on it for quite a while now, and I don't want to get to a point where I'm sick of it or where I can't hear it clearly anymore, because the problem with getting to that stage is that it means that you make decisions that perhaps aren't the correct decisions. Like, I might choose to tear it apart and like chop it up and put it back together, not because that's a good decision, but because I'm so sick of hearing it that I don't think it sounds good anymore. Like, it might just end up sounding boring to me just because of the repetition. So I think it will be really beneficial to take a break with it. And also, like I mentioned, it is at a point where like all the pieces are there. It has the right sound. It's just a case of polishing it at the moment. If it wasn't at this stage, excuse me. If it wasn't at this stage where I had all of the correct pieces, I would be worried about leaving that headspace. That song has been occupying my imagination, and like in a way I've been how do I explain this? If I had left it before I had all of the pieces, then there was always a risk that I would get absorbed in a new song and sort of forget where Torii was meant to be headed. Whereas now that I've got all the pieces and I know where it's going, and I don't need to like be thinking about it all the time or coming up with new ideas. Yeah, I just think it's at a pretty safe point now because I don't need to think of new ideas for it. I've got all of the ideas ready. So for the next episode, I'm going to move on to track number 2, which has the working title Never Forget. So once again, thank you so much for joining me. And if you like this video, please leave a like. As always, I'm still new to this, so if you have any feedback is always welcome. And because I am new, if you like this video, you should definitely subscribe. Thank you in advance. Anyway, I'll see you later. Bye for now.